Great to meet you. Thank you for taking a minute out today. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
So let me ask you this. Talking about moving around and taking photos, being an artist, I'm wondering, going through the COVID time period, how
Mhm.
much of living through that has still affected the way that you create and do things today?
Well, COVID was a very strange time for me because I was living in Hong Kong at the time and I was still doing art shows. So 2020, 2021, I was doing when we could, whenever anything opened up, whenever they released restrictions, you would schedule an art show for right then because then everybody wanted to go somewhere, everybody showed up to the show. So it kind of helped there. Traveling was very difficult and I kind of fell into this practice of creating stuff of wherever I was. So I had to leave Hong Kong during the height of it in 2021, was living in Thailand, and so kind of got into this nomad lifestyle. So creating on the go, setting up a studio in a garage and an Airbnb is kind of the way of life now.
Yeah,
Yeah.
interesting. So let's get to the heart and soul of what you do on a daily basis. If I
Mm-hmm.
put you in front of a bunch of 10 or 11-year-olds, it's career
Mm-hmm.
day, and one of the kids in the back of the room is like, hey, what do you do for a living? How do you answer them?
I would probably say I'm a painter and photographer, and the photos I take are of cultures around the world.
Okay. What did you want to be when you were a kid? What was your dream life?
I want to be a rock star, I
Okay.
think. Yeah, so I kind of grew up in the music scene. My dad sold guitars growing up, so we always had guitars and amps, and we always looked up to rock stars. And so there's a lot of mosh pits and kind of violent expressions of art, and
Yeah.
so that's kind of where I fell into photographing violent religious festivals because it's kind of like I'm used to that stuff, kind of,
Yeah.
and I'm into the adventure, I'm into the action. So creating art in a chaotic environment is uh, what I was made for, kind of.
Okay. What was the first live show that you ever saw that really blew you away, that made you think you either want to be a rock star or you want to be in this environment?
Uh, I don't know. I mean, it was probably like uh, the first band I ever saw was Dave Matthews Band, but that didn't really make me feel it. Um, it's probably like Every Time I Die or Under Oath or Warp Tour. So think of like Warp Tour era. I
Yeah.
was kind of those kids.
Okay.
Um, but yeah, I mean, seeing that stuff on stage, being able to like connect with a vibration that's not just taking up the band on stage, but everybody in the room,
Yeah.
having people sing music back to you that you wrote, all that type of stuff is, if you've never felt it, I feel bad for you. You know?
I remember in the 90s, I had a friend that was really into metal and just hardcore stuff. And I think we saw Pantera. And it was one
Oh,
of the times that I saw, from up top, one of the mosh pits and kind of felt that intensity. But
never
um,
been in one?
I no,
Oh, it's an
Now,
experience.
see, this is the thing. When I was in high school, I was 4'11". So I've always kind of protected that smaller version of me. I mean, I grew and I'm 5'8" now, but at that point, like I stayed away from anything. Like I remember one time, one of the most intense live places that I was ever at, which would
Mm,
have been probably perfect for taking pictures, was at a David Allan Coe show. Good friend
mm,
of mine was like, "We got to go to this bar." It was in the middle of Kansas. We didn't quite know where it was at, and we go in there and a fight starts. And I
mm.
remember a couple friends around me kind of like they were helping me kind of out of the way because it was going to get bad. But I mean, in a show like that, I mean, it's broken bottles. There's going to be blood. It's on. It's going to get like Jailhouse Rock. So that was the most intense thing that I'd ever felt. But talk to me a little bit about where you were born and raised. What were the seeds that were planted into you to get into this creative world that you're in right now?
Well, I touched on it a little bit. So being in bands, and so I started off in music. I liked loud expression, and that kind of led into your band needs t-shirts, you need flyers, you need posters. So I started designing things, got into artwork, began to paint, was a designer for a while, moved to Hong Kong when I was probably 26 or something like that. So I was there for quite a long time. So it's almost like I don't remember the former me.
Yeah,
Once you travel around this much, it's kind of sometimes I forget who I am.
yeah,
Um, so I would think that the roots in the arts growing up and then the angst to get out of a small town kind of like led me to want to travel a little bit more. I always wanted to see the things that I would see in books, I guess growing up, I had a lot of encyclopedias and books and stuff like that, stuff that you'd look through. So I always wanted to see this stuff for myself.
Yeah,
So this kind of stew of chaotic artwork, of being a painter, living in a place where I could fly to a lot of these events without spending 12 hours on a plane, kind of led me into, oh, this is how I want to express myself, or this is a subject that I think needs covered that no one else is doing and that I'm kind of like perfectly made for. But
yeah,
I think it's another aspect to it too, where I like things like motorcycles and um, kind of uh, bizarre forms of transportation. I like learning things. So getting in and out of, say, like a jungle, you would need a motorcycle at some point there. There's been times where that's the only way I'd be able to get in and out of an event.
yes.
So having those skills under my belt kind of helped me pursue the photographs that I've been able to capture.
So did you start out in the whole dark room manual camera kind of a thing? How did the evolution of your hardware, how did that begin and get to where it's at today?
Well, I still shoot film. That's like all I
Okay.
shoot.
Okay.
It's I don't sit in the dark room myself. I've done it in the past, but it's just a pain in the ass. I'd rather
Yeah.
pay somebody else to do it. And
Yeah.
because it's I'll come back from an event and I'll have let's say like 30 rolls of film that I need to get developed, and it's two different sizes. It's the amount of chemicals and space to do all that is I'd rather pay for it, you
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
And the scanner, it's a lot of these things too where I can drop off. Like most recently, I was in you got to be careful when you're traveling with film because a baggage scanner will mess it up. And
Wow.
so
Okay.
whenever I go through airport security, it's always a risk where if I have all this expensive film, we're talking $20, $25 roll, maybe $30 roll, depending on the film, um, could it doesn't completely ruin it on the first time, although it could. You ask them to hand check it. Sometimes they say no. So when I'm traveling around, if I have undeveloped film, I shot an event and I need to take a plane back to the States, um, if it goes through the baggage scanner, I might have lost all the work that I've just
Yeah.
did. So I'll have to develop in country a lot of the times, or else I'll take a train to another country that will develop it. So I was in Rome, got somebody developed. Eventually, they shipped the negatives back to me and just got
Okay.
it sitting there. You know,
Interesting. What kind of camera do you use?
I have a few. My main one is it's called a Pentax 6.7. So it's got a wooden handle. It shoots 120 film. I should have had some to show you. You know what 120 film is?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah.
35 is this big, which your old camera's 35 is about this, 120 is about this size, and you only
Okay.
get so it's bigger negatives, stuff that you can use for like slide presentations and that type of
Gotcha.
stuff.
Yeah.
So usually that camera, it's super heavy. So it's a pain in the ass when it breaks down because these are usually antique cameras I'm shooting with.
Uh-huh.
But the benefit with this thing, it's so heavy and so big that there's two benefits. One, when you show up to a location, they assume that you're a professional. They're like, oh, look at that
Yeah.
fucking camera. Especially if it's a place that's not used to press. If it's like in the middle of the jungle, they're impressed by it and they think you're important. So you have a little bit of leeway there. And then if it breaks down, you can always kill a man with it. It's a heavy chunk of metal.
Yeah,
So
for sure. I had a Pentax K1000. That was the one
I have
that,
one of those too. I love
yeah,
that game.
I totally love it. Yeah. My dad was into taking pictures, and I've been into taking pictures my whole life, and I graduated to digital, but I remember that bridge of figuring it out. One of my good friends, him and his dad owned a photography studio in downtown Kansas City. They would take pictures of like foods and whatnot. They'd groom it for publications, and they were really into it. And he was like, "You got to get a digital camera." And I was resistant. When I finally did, I felt like a whole new world was opened up to me. I was just walking around in the city, just taking pictures of all kinds of things because I was used to that world of rolls of film. Like I just didn't have any boundaries. But that's awesome. So how did you hit that existential moment with the way that digital photography is now to stick with paper? What was that like for you?
I use both depending, but I prefer film and I use it most of the time because I feel like it's like cheating sometimes. Because so I've had digital cameras. I use those, especially on night shoots.
Yeah.
It's very hard. You have to push your film. You don't really know what you're getting. It's dark. I've had problems with it in the past, but so I went kind of digital and I wasn't getting what I liked. And then when you're starting to use, especially the camera I have, it's just so good. It's there's no digital camera that can really touch it unless you're spending 15 grand.
Yeah.
And so I can spend 1,500 on a camera, although the film and getting developed is super expensive. But it's kind of, if you have the photo lined up, you got everything sharpened, you have the right shutter speed, you have everything set up right. If you take a photo, it's gonna look good.
Yeah.
You can take pictures of boring things. So if you're
Uh-huh.
starting to take pictures of an interesting things, it's uh it's just so much better to me. Like it looks nicer,
Yeah.
and it's one of those things though that I need to go to digital because where you can buy film, where you can develop film, um, the whole thing of carrying all these cameras around, them breaking, it's just going to be too much eventually. So I need to hopefully that I find a camera that I fall in love with that's digital
Yeah.
before the end of that, you know.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. What was the first photo shoot or first photos that you showed somebody that you saw a visceral reaction from you and you felt like you found your destiny? You felt like you found your creative outlet?
First photos. You mean like younger days photos?
Yeah. Like what gave you that adrenaline rush?
Well, maybe it's hard to think back to the initial photos. I mean, we were always taking band photos, but I think the first time that I realized that I found something was when I went on my first excursion was uh, the crucifixions in the Philippines. So they
Yeah.
on Easter they nail people to crosses, people whip their backs. They don't die, but they go up nailed to a cross for 15, 20 minutes. It's part of a longer Easter reenactment. But when I first got there, I had gotten a guide because I just heard about these things. I took a bunch of cameras, and then being confronted with it for the first time, and having somebody walk by a van and blood splatter across the window right in front of my eyes, um, it'll change you. You're in a completely different zone, and it's one of those things when you look around and you can feel the fear of other people, and you don't have that fear, and you can see, oh, I need to get this photo here, and you get this adrenaline. You kind of get this thing of, oh, all this stuff that in my life that the skills that I've acquired, the experiences that I've had, the tolerances that I've built up in myself, this is it, you know. And then when I got those photos back, they were not all of them were good,
Yeah.
you know. But you have a couple that are unbelievable that you never thought that you'd be the one that produced, and
Yeah.
so it became kind of a like an addiction from there.
Yeah. So from a philosophical standpoint, because I have a photographer's brain, I've been doing this for a long time.
Mm.
What is your philosophy of taking shots? What is the ultimate reason? Like beyond it being something that you're presenting and it's a part of your work, but just from a personal standpoint, what is it about photography that you love the most and that you find essential in the creative pursuit of humans?
Oh, I think it's one of those things where, coming from a painter point of view, so when you're painting, you have a canvas and you can do whatever you want. You
Yeah.
pick the colors, I mean, within reason, but you're deciding what is in the atmosphere. Whereas when you're shooting a photograph, unless you're in a controlled environment like a studio, and I've done a lot of that, I love that as well. But when you're, say, street shooting or shooting an event, um, you are catching a forgotten moment. It's ephemeral, it's going to disappear,
Yep.
and you have to wait for these things to line up. So sometimes when you're in a studio, you can get perfect shapes and alignments and everything like that. But when you're on the street taking photos, it's like a you're catching lightning in a bottle, you
Yeah.
know. And then once you, especially with film too, because you never know if you actually got it until
Yes.
weeks
Yep.
later. So when you get the photos back, sometimes you know that, oh, I've gotten something really special here, and then eventually you get developed and it is what you hoped it was going to be.
Yeah.
um, it's an electrifying feeling. So I think it's that being able to create with the chaos. It's almost like um, the world around you or God or whatever you want to call it is creating right next to you. And so it's you're the right hand, it's the left hand, and it's that
Wow.
experience, you know.
That's so well said. I was in 2001. I was stuck in Europe during 9/11. I was in the back of a water taxi in Venice, and I was
Sounds
backpacking.
terrible.
What's that?
Sounds terrible.
Well, so it actually turned out pretty well, and
Yeah,
I
that's great.
yeah, it's wonderful, and it was weird because I landed in Paris on the 4th of September, and I was
Mm,
just backpacking, and I just cut myself off from communicating back home. I was just doing my thing. So
mm,
after that happened, I ended up going to Vernazza, which is the poor man's Riviera, Cinque Terre,
Yeah.
and finally made my way back to America. But at one point, I was just taking photos, and I had like 35 rolls on the K1000. And at one point, I went to a Frida Kahlo exhibit, and I was halfway through it. It was in Venice, and they told me you can't take pictures. They were freaking out. They were panicking. When I
Mm.
came back home and developed my film, little did I know, I accidentally used a roll that I took a whole bunch of landscape pictures in Venice of, and I took pictures of the Frida Kahlo exhibit over them. And it
Oh
was a
wow.
total accident, total trip. Have you ever done that before? Have you ever double expose camera or a roll?
Yeah, and it broke my heart. Were they cool when you did it? Did it turn out?
Totally hip, man. Because it was like Frida over water, because it was a lot of water shots and landscape shots. So
Mm.
all of the still shots of paintings were just kind of like silhouetted ghost like over the top of them.
I mean, that's incredible. My experience was a lot less happy. So I was in the Philippines. I was shooting the crucifixions a few years after the first time I went, and I was in the middle of Manila, and I heard about this graveyard. So I was like, I want to go see the big central graveyard. I heard the Filipino graves. Sometimes they stack them like apartment buildings, so you have
Yeah,
like little graves on top. So I'm like, I'm going to take photos of that. So I go to this graveyard, and it's a whole slum community in the graveyard. So mausoleums kind of look like little houses.
yeah.
They were in them as houses. There
Wow.
were kids taking baths, they were washing clothes. There's a little market on the street, and this is in a graveyard. So like all my neighbors were dead. I was like, that's going to be the name of the series. I'm going to take a bunch of these photos. And then the photo that I took over were nighttime photos of explosions in Taiwan. So when they mashed up, it didn't look good. So it still breaks my heart that I could go back and take photos of this graveyard again. I wonder if the slum community is still there, but I wonder if I'd have the balls to do it, because walking around in those areas, you have it's a double edged sword. One, you think that it's going to be dangerous. Usually, it's not, but it's also you kind of feel bad sometimes when you're taking photos of people in pain.
Right.
They interesting photos, but I don't know, it just doesn't feel
I get
good.
it.
You know what I mean?
I get it. Yeah, sometimes I'll see a homeless person on the side of a road with a very unique sign or a very unique way with a
Mm,
dog, something that's very, there's a lot going on in it that would be a good picture. But then
yeah.
there's that part of me that chimes into some karmic echo, and I'm like, man, do I want to do that? Because it's not like I'm going to be putting it in a gallery or it's going to get shown or it's going to get mapped. But at the end of the day, it's like there's a level, you're just getting into this world that's very painful, and you can tell it's painful. And
Yeah.
yeah, and you get to that artistic validation. Is it okay because I'm doing this from the right play? Yeah, it's that whole
Yeah, I feel bad about it, but I think you should, honestly, because
right.
I have a friend in Hong Kong named Gideon DeCock, amazing street photographer. And the balls on this guy, he would just walk up to people's faces and just pop and keep walking.
Yeah,
So this is how he got good photos. He just had the balls to do it. So sometimes you gotta take a photo. It's just a photo. You're not stealing anything from them, but
right.
it is still an awkward
Yeah,
thing to
totally.
overcome.
So what is traveling around the world taking photos done for you for your level of empathy and understanding culture and calibrating that into a human feeling with the way that you feel on the planet? Has it just made you feel more comfortable being alive on the planet? How has all of this been translated into how you view life?
The experiences of different cultures and that type of thing.
Yeah, and all these different settings, like going into the mausoleum and the graveyard. That's yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I've seen the best and worst of humanity. I would say, and hmm, it's weird being an American and seeing this stuff, and then coming back and you see. I've seen places that are so much worse than America and so much better than America too. So you have this thing where it's like you shouldn't be complaining because things are so much worse in other parts of the country. You shouldn't, you people that can't escape these lives, they live in the middle of nowhere. And then you go on, say, like the subway in New York or someplace like that, and you've been on subways in Hong Kong or China or Taiwan, and you think, we're supposed to be the top of the world, and this stuff is a shithole. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like you have this double-edged sword of, I don't know, it puts you a little bit, makes you self-reflect a lot.
yeah,
But then also it's the when you start to see cultures around the world, it's interesting too, because you start to understand like little things that people do, and you want to pick it up. So it's like each culture has body language
Yeah.
that you wouldn't expect, and so you start to pick up on that. The way they joke about things, like you start to learn a little bit of language when you're there, and their cuss words are always interesting. It's like how they view the world. It's also how groups interact. I think is really interesting. So it's made me apathetic, but then kind of gave me this golden standard of if we picked and chose from all these different cultures the best things, we brought them all into one place, and we just did that stuff, we'd be we'd be much better, in a much better position as a culture and as a world.
Yeah.
But it's there's always darkness wherever there's light. So there's always going to be bad parts to things, and
Yeah.
sometimes you don't see them right away.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I don't know, there's darkness throughout the world that people wouldn't expect. But then there's also um, really beautiful things that are really simple
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
make life worth living. So if you're really depressed, go somewhere.
Yeah.
It'll You'll realize that the world is so much bigger. It's so much crazier than you expect. I think that's through my work. I think some people will start to realize that the world is not as cut and dry and simple as you think it is. There's still cannibals out there. You know what I mean? There's still people who sacrifice large amount of animals. There's people that nail themselves to crosses, that believe in ghosts, um, all these types of things. And in some cases, I've seen crazy miracles and all that type of stuff. So um, when you see movies like Indiana Jones, some of that stuff is real.
Yeah.
It's still out there. There's still, if you go to Komodo, these things are the size of dinosaurs and eat goats. You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
there's still crazy stuff all over the world. So I, it made me less. I don't know. When you're a youth, you think, oh, this is all the world is, and it's so simple and blah blah blah. It expands your mind. I think is the
Absolutely. To the
thing.
complexities of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Who's been a hero for you? Who's been kind of an inspiration for you in your work?
Real or not real?
Both and or.
Real and not real. Hmm. I mean, there's a movie called The Bang Bang Club that I thought was really interesting. It's about photographers in South Africa who were their war photographers, essentially. And it was a group of four photographers based on a real story. There's a movie, it's like a decent movie, but the whole story of these guys just going into dangerous places to get amazing photos and like risking their lives for their art. Um, that was always very inspirational. I mentioned like Indiana Jones. I think we got like the third one on VHS, and it was one of the only VHSs we had. So I watched it constantly. So that probably stuck in my brain a little bit. Um, yeah, I mean, as far as like adventure and taking photos, I think those are the two people that come to mind right now. But I like in terms of how you should approach life. Um, I've been really into that book, Meditations by Marcus Aurelius.
Yeah.
I think that's a good base. If I would have read that earlier in my life, if somebody would have handed it to me when I was like say 14, like 16, this is how you be a man, or this is how you should treat people, this is how you should conduct yourself. Um, I think I would have been better off. But I'm glad I found it now. And so looking up to at least what he strived to be, in terms of how you treat people, how you treat yourself. Um, that's like a person in my general life that I kind of look up to.
Yeah. So when you look at your evolution, your creative arc of what you're doing creatively between painting and photography, how do you view every day waking up and continuing this continuum? Do you see it as an evolution? Do you see it as where you're at geographically? How do you compartmentalize the evolution of you as an artist?
I think one of the things you got to do is you got to take advantage of whatever opportunities you have at your hands at that moment.
Yeah.
So if you can, if you're living in Hong Kong, you can travel to Asia very easily. So you use that. Um, if you have space to create large paintings. If you can only do small paintings, do small paintings. If you can only sketch. For I think the past 12 months, I haven't painted any large scale paintings because I've been traveling. So I'm just kind of more focusing on painting or on the photography end of things.
Yeah.
So that's been like the main thing for the past like say year or so because I've been without a studio, and then you doing small sketches and paintings in a smaller scale in like a notebook.
Yes.
So that's kind of the evolution of their evolution as an artist in general. I think you got to just follow what you're interested in. So there was kind of a lull in the painting community when I came to LA, and so and photography started to blow up for me. So you kind of ride that wave, whatever's kind of moving at that moment. And then even more recently, I've expanded to, so I have a photography book related to this project that I've been planning forever, but is now finally going to be coming out this year. I have other things related to that that I've been creating, whether it's like merch. Um, there's like an information book that I've been working on. And then, I mean, on the other side of being an artist, there's still paintings. And then I'm doing sculptures for this show. So I'm sorry, I'm getting kind of scattered
No,
here,
you're
but
fine.
there's a photography. Eventually, when I release the photography book for Holy Violence, I'm going to do like a gallery show with the photos.
Yeah,
But I wanted something a little bit more because I'm like a fine artist. So I'm doing cross religion sculptures. So what that means is I've been collecting a lot of artifacts when I go to these things. So say it's that you have a Taoist whip. They have this kind of like cloth whip that they whip and kind of purify the area. So I'm going to do, usually the handle is a dragon. So I might switch out the god to like say a Western god or like a patron saint or that type of thing. I'm going to do a bunch of these kind of religious cross religion sculptures to show how much these things are similar. So that kind of evolves into what you're doing as well. So it's kind
yeah,
of whatever skills that I have or that I've acquired, use them and kind of follow the best idea or the thing that makes you happy.
yeah. So, of everything that you've done and created, what are you the proudest of?
Mm, and a single thing or
Or maybe a period of time, maybe just in general, like a creative movement you were in, or just in general.
the greatest creative accomplishment. Um, it's hard to say. There's a lot of art shows that I'm proud of. There's one in Hong Kong I did where we had I had paintings that were merged in plants. We got some really good like local DJs that had music that kind of mixed in there. I had designed cocktails that looked like the paintings, and we had I had two dancers that performed like a weird dance in the middle of the party without like anybody knowing what was going to happen. It wasn't announced. We had these kind of two really eccentric dancers merge with the crowd, and music got turned up. So that whole experience I was into, and then I enjoyed. And then I think one of the most profound experiences that I had was when I had a piece auctioned off by Christie's, and it
Yeah,
was a piece that I worked really hard on. It's kind of like a movable sculpture. It was made with these kind of recycled plastic tiles, and so it would sit flat, and then you'd be able to manipulate it as well, and so it kind of had scales and this type of thing. It was a
yeah,
piece that was very difficult to make. I knew what I wanted to make, but I would just wander into hardware stores and say, like, how can I make this joint move the way I want it? How do I attach these things? Blah blah blah. So I worked really hard to make it, and then when you're sitting in an auction room and they're auctioning off your piece, it's and you're I had like a girl I was just recently started dating at the time standing next to me. I'm like, oh God, somebody bid, please bid, come on, please bid anything. So eventually a bunch of people bid, and like it went for like a decent price. So that whole moment of making an object and then being in a moment where this is it,
yeah.
it's now or never. That whole experience I think was it did a lot for me.
That's cool. So, at the end of the day, Tyler, everyone has a perception of you family, friends, fans, but you run the show. What's your perception of you? Who do you think you are?
Who do you think you are? Uh, I'm a photographer and artist that travels around the world, gets into crazy experiences, um, kind, loving, friendly. Uh, but I think it's one of those things where I don't know, maybe it's well traveled is a weird word to use, but very knowledgeable about weird things. I have a lot of experiences. I think if you're ever want to try to do anything, I'm a very knowledgeable person to talk to.
Sure.
Um, as far as do you want to travel somewhere? Do you want to create some artwork? Do you want to figure out how to get people to buy that artwork? So I think it's just weird artist, I think is the shortest version of it.
I dig it. So if anyone wants to get in line to get your new book, they want to see your work, they want to reach out, any of the good business, where do they go?
So you go to holyviolence.com, or you can go on Instagram to holy.violence. Those are kind of the main places that you can check me out. tylerjacks.com is also a place where you can check stuff out on. If you want to go to any of these events, I've made a list of about 70 that I usually track down. Just released that on Patreon, so you can check us out on Patreon as well. But if you go to holyviolence.com, you'll be able to see everything else.
Right on. Tyler, this has been great. Thank you, sir. Thank you for your story. Travel
Thank you.
well.